The moment my mother's hand cracked across my face in front of 20 people, I knew three things. One, I had just been publicly humiliated at what was supposed to be a Christmas celebration. Two, my family had severely underestimated who I'd become. And three, they were about to discover what happens when you push an invisible daughter too far. My name is Danielle Miller. I'm 35 years old, and I own a $15 million company that nobody in my family knew existed until the night they tried to steal it. You see, I'd spent my entire life being overlooked. The daughter who didn't matter, the sister who was always second. While my younger sister Madison got every ounce of attention, praise, and protection, I learned to survive in the shadows. I built an empire in silence while they assumed I'd amounted to nothing. But that Christmas dinner, that was the night they finally saw me, and it was already too late. They thought a public ambush would force me into compliance. They thought shame and family loyalty would break me. They were so certain of their leverage that my mother felt entitled to strike me in front of witnesses when I refused their demands. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than they'd been planning their trap. And the man I called after walking out that door, he didn't just bring evidence, he brought their entire world crashing down. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's about the day the invisible daughter became untouchable. And trust me, they never saw it coming. My name is Danielle Miller. I'm 35 years old, and for the last 8 years, I've been the owner and CEO of Miller Advisory Solutions, a logistics consulting firm worth $15 million. But on the night of December 23rd, sitting in my modest one-bedroom apartment, wrapping a generic gift for my sister, not a single member of my family knew that company existed. That wasn't by accident. You see, I'd learned a long time ago that success in my family was something to hide. Not because they'd be jealous, though they would be, but because every achievement I'd ever shared had been either dismissed or immediately overshadowed. So somewhere around my late 20s, after my father asked when I was going to get a real job with benefits upon hearing I'd started my own company, I simply stopped telling them anything that mattered. To my parents, I was just Danielle, the responsible one, the quiet one, the daughter with the boring office job who'd never quite figured her life out. No husband, no children, nothing remarkable to report at family gatherings. They had no idea that I employed 35 people, that Fortune 500 companies paid 6 figures for my consulting services, or that I'd built something substantial entirely on my own. I kept 2 phones, one for business, one for family. The family phone mostly gathered dust. I'd learned that particular coping mechanism, early compartmentalization, as survival strategy. Work was where I excelled, where I was seen, where I mattered. Family was obligation, a checkbox to tick. Show up at holidays, send birthday gifts, respond to the occasional guilt trip text message, then retreat back into the life I'd actually built for myself. It wasn't always like this, or maybe it was, and I just hadn't understood it yet. As a child, I was 10 years old when I won the regional science fair, not just placed one. First place, full scholarship opportunity to a prestigious summer science program. Local news coverage. It should have been one of those milestone moments parents remember forever. My parents missed the entire ceremony because Madison had a dance recital that same afternoon. Madison was 8. She didn't place, didn't even make the top 10. But she was there in her little costume, and she needed them, and I was supposed to understand that her recital was more important than my award ceremony. My trophy went straight to the basement. I saw it years later, covered in dust, sitting on a shelf behind the Christmas decorations. At 16, I got straight A's and early acceptance to Northwestern with a full academic scholarship. That same semester, Madison brought home 1B among her usual C's. My parents threw a celebration dinner for her incredible improvement. My acceptance letter lived on the refrigerator for exactly 2 days before being covered by one of Madison's art projects. When I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern at 24, my family did attend the ceremony, I'll give them that. But the celebratory dinner afterward was spent entirely discussing Madison's boyfriend drama, some guy who'd ghosted her after 3 dates. I sat there in my cap and gown, listening to my mother console Madison about her broken heart, and I realized something fundamental: I could achieve everything in the world, and it still wouldn't make me the priority. So I stopped trying. I built my life quietly in the margins of their attention, and I built it well. But that December evening, as I drove to my parents' suburban Illinois home for Christmas dinner, something felt different. Instead, my mother had called 3 times to confirm I was coming unusual, since normally one guilt-laden voicemail was sufficient. My father had sent an actual text message. Important, we're all together this year. My father barely knew how to text. I pulled up to the house at 6 o'clock sharp, not early, which would seem eager, not late, which would give them ammunition. The driveway was packed with cars. Through the windows, I could see the house was full of people. My stomach dropped. My parents didn't throw elaborate parties. This wasn't normal. I walked in to find approximately 20 guests scattered throughout the living room and dining room, extended family I saw maybe once a year, my parents' country club friends, neighbors, the Hendersons from 3 doors down, all dressed semi-formally, all holding wine glasses, all turning to greet me with smiles that felt just slightly too practiced. Danielle, so wonderful you could make it. Your parents talk about you all the time. Family is everything, isn't it? The comments felt scripted, rehearsed, like everyone had been given the same talking points. I scanned the room and clocked the first real warning sign: the seating arrangement. Normally at family dinners, I was relegated to the kids' table or the folding chairs squeezed into the den. Tonight, there was one elaborate table professionally set, and the seat in the center, flanked by both my parents, had a place card with my name. Madison sat directly across from me. She wasn't making eye contact. She was checking her phone obsessively, something she never did at family dinners, because my mother usually confiscated phones at the door. Something was very, very wrong. Dinner proceeded with forced cheerfulness. I ate mechanically, responding to small talk, watching. I've sat through enough business negotiations to recognize a setup when I see one. The guest list wasn't random. These were all people from my parents' generation, socially influential. The type who would judge harshly if someone violated family values. No one who might advocate for me. No one who'd question the narrative I suspected was coming. Around 8 o'clock, after coffee was served, my father stood up. The room fell quiet. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. He began, his voice warm and confident. We wanted to be surrounded by people who love us for this important family discussion. My hand stilled on my coffee cup. He turned to look at me directly. Danielle, your mother and I want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished with your business. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He'd never once acknowledged my company, never asked about it, never showed the slightest interest, and now suddenly, in front of 20 witnesses, he knew it existed, which meant they'd been researching my finances without my permission, without my knowledge. Madison has been going through a difficult time, he continued, his tone shifting to something more somber. She's lost her job. She's struggling financially, and your mother and I have been thinking a lot about what it means to be a family, about real fairness. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Madison needs help, and you're in a position to provide it. So we've discussed it, and we believe, he paused, looking around the room, as if gathering witness confirmation. We believe the right thing. The fair thing would be for you to transfer 50% ownership of your company to your sister, not as a loan, not as an investment, as a gift, because that's what family does. The silence that followed was suffocating. 50% of a $15 million company, $7.5 million. They wanted me to simply give it away. Madison sat across from me, eyes downcast, the picture of humble gratitude. Not surprised, not shocked, not protesting that this was too much to ask, because she already knew. They all already knew this wasn't a request. This was an ambush, and 20 pairs of eyes were waiting to see if I'd comply. I didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, and I watched my father's confident expression flicker with uncertainty. He glanced at my mother. That look told me everything. This pause wasn't in their script. My mother stepped in smoothly. Danielle, sweetheart, I know this is a lot to process, but family takes care of each other. Madison is your sister. You're supposed to look out for one another. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. In 35 years, Madison had never once looked out for me. Not when I was excluded from family photos. Not when I ate lunch alone in high school because making friends was Danielle's problem to solve. Not when I worked 3 jobs to pay for textbooks while she got an allowance for existing. But I said nothing. I just waited. My father tried again, his voice taking on that practiced tone of paternal authority. We gave you everything. We paid for your childhood. Your education gave you the foundation to build what you have now. Everything you've achieved started with what we provided. That was categorically false. I'd had full academic scholarships from age 14 onward. I'd paid my own way through graduate school with a combination of grants, teaching assistantships, and freelance work. They'd contributed exactly nothing to my education past 8th grade. But the guests didn't know that, and that's what mattered to them. One of my father's country club friends, Gerald, I think his name was, spoke up right on cue. It's beautiful that you're in a position to bless your family, Danielle. That's what success is really about, isn't it? Family is so much more important than money, added one of my mother's bridge partners, shaking her head as if she were sharing profound wisdom. I recognized what was happening. They were creating a unified front, a moral chorus designed to make dissent feel like betrayal. Different voices, same message, compliance was the only acceptable response. My father leaned forward, and his voice dropped to something that might have sounded concerned to the casual observer, but felt like a threat to me. You're not going to refuse, are you? In front of everyone after we've explained how much your sister needs you. Madison, for her part, remained perfectly still, across from me occasionally, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She looked small, vulnerable, grateful in advance for my generosity. She hadn't said a single word, but she didn't need to. She was playing her role beautifully. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. When I spoke, my voice was calm, almost clinical. Dad, before I respond, I have a question. How much did you say my company was worth? He blinked, thrown by the question. I didn't specify exactly when $15 million. I said clearly, looking around the room. So when you're asking me to give Madison 50% ownership, you're asking me to give her $7.5 million. I just want to make sure we're all clear about the actual numbers we're discussing here. I heard several audible gasps. Clearly, the guests hadn't been told the stakes were quite that high. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances. Now I have another question. I continued, still in that same measured tone. When Madison needed help with her rent last year, did you call me silence? When she totaled her car and needed a replacement, did you ask me to contribute more silence? No, you paid for those things yourselves. But now that the amount is large enough to solve not just Madison's problems, but presumably your own financial concerns as well, suddenly it's a family obligation. My father's face flushed red. We deserve this, he snapped, and I could see the mask cracking. We raised you. We gave you life. You wouldn't exist without us. You owe us. There it was. Deserve, owe. Not Madison needs, not family helps family. But we deserve this and you owe us. I've fulfilled my obligations, I said quietly. I show up at holidays. I send birthday gifts. I answer when you call. I've been a dutiful daughter. But I don't owe you my life's work. My mother's voice turned to ice. Is that what we are to you, Danielle? Obligations? I stood up and reached for my coat. The answer is no. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, attacking from every direction. How selfish! After everything they've done for you. I can't believe. My father stood too, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Sit down. We are not finished with this conversation. Yes, I said, slinging my coat over my arm. We are. I made it 3 steps toward the door before my mother crossed the room in a blur of movement. Her hand connected with my face in a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent dining room. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned. 20 people froze, forks halfway to mouths, wine glasses suspended in air. Nobody intervened. Nobody gasped at the violence. They gasped at me, at whatever I'd done to provoke such a response. I didn't touch my face, didn't cry, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I just looked at my mother, really looked at her, and said quietly, "Thank you." She blinked, confused. What? Thank you for finally being honest about what I am to you. I turned to address the room at large. You all wanted a show tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't let me interrupt dessert. I walked out. Nobody tried to stop me. In my car, I sat in the dark driveway for 5 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. I wasn't crying. I was thinking. Something didn't add up. How did they know my company was worth $15 million I'd never told them? Why demand ownership instead of just asking for money? Why tonight with all these witnesses? Why were they so confident I'd comply? My business instincts kicked in, overriding the emotional noise. They weren't just entitled, they were desperate. And desperate people don't make elaborate plans like this unless they think they have leverage. I started the car, but I didn't drive home. I drove to my office downtown, the one place that had always felt safe. I pulled out my business phone and dialed a number I'd had on retainer for 3 years. Martin, it's Danielle Miller. I need a comprehensive audit. Everything with my name on it, credit reports, property records, loan documents, business filings, anything I'm attached to that I didn't personally authorize. I'll pay rush fees. Should I ask what this is about? Martin Chen's voice was professionally neutral, but I could hear the concern underneath. Family, I said flatly. Say no more. I'll start tonight. As I hung up, I stared out at the Chicago skyline and whispered to my reflection in the window. Whatever leverage they think they have, they're about to regret using it. 48 hours later, Martin Chen sat across from me in my office conference room with a manila folder that looked far too thin for the amount of damage I suspected it contained. You're not going to like this, he said, which is never how you want a forensic audit to begin. He opened the folder and spread out the documents in chronological order. July through December 2023. 6 months of systematic fraud executed with enough sophistication to suggest careful planning. 4 credit card accounts. Martin began pointing to the first set of statements. Opened in your name between July and November using your social security number. Total current balance $85,000. All statements redirected to your parents' address so you'd never see them. I picked up one of the statements, scanning the charges. Designer handbags, country club dues, restaurant supply equipment. Madison's spending patterns were easy to identify. She'd never met a luxury brand she didn't want to own. My parents' charges were more practical, but just as damning. Personal loan for $150,000 originated in September. Martin continued, You're listed as co-borrower. Your signature was forged on the documents, though it's a decent forgery they clearly practiced. Loan is currently in good standing because they're making payments, but if it defaults, you're legally liable for the full amount. My stomach tightened. $150,000 of liability I knew nothing about. There's more. In October, someone filed documents with the county recorder attempting to add you as 50% owner of your sister's condo. Purpose appears to be tax evasion, claiming homestead exemption twice. The filing was rejected due to incomplete notarization, so technically this fraud didn't succeed, but it shows intent. And they didn't stop there, I said, seeing where this was going. No. Between August and October, your father listed Miller Advisory Solutions as a business reference on 3 separate loan applications. He never contacted your company, never asked permission, just used the name and reputation. One of those loans, $45,000, was approved in part because of your company's standing. Martin sat back, his expression grim. This isn't opportunistic fraud, Danielle. This is systematic. Someone researched exactly what they could do with your identity, executed it across multiple fronts, and timed it perfectly. They created a web of liability around you. Leverage, I said quietly. If I refused their demand, they could threaten to report me for fraud I didn't commit. By the time I proved my innocence, the damage would be done. Exactly. And if authorities discovered it first, you'd be the one facing charges until you could prove otherwise. I stared at the documents spread across the table, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just family dysfunction. This was calculated criminal and designed to destroy me if I didn't comply. Martin slid another document across the table. There's something else. When I pulled your records, I found your original birth certificate. I looked down at the photocopy. Patricia Moore, age 23, father blank. An amended certificate was filed in 1991. Martin continued gently. Robert Miller legally adopted you when you were 3 years old. His name was added then. I should have been shocked. I should have felt something dramatic and overwhelming. Instead, what I felt was a strange sense of relief, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. I always knew, I heard myself say. I didn't consciously know. But somewhere deep down I knew. It explained everything. Why Robert never looked directly at me as a child. Why he flinched every time I called him Dad. Why every achievement felt like it physically pained him. Why Madison's birth had changed the entire household dynamic overnight. Suddenly, there were real family photos everywhere, and I was either cropped out or missing entirely. I wasn't his daughter. I was a reminder that his wife had loved someone else, first had created a child with someone else, had a whole life before him that he could never erase, and he'd punished me for it every single day of my life. Robert's restaurant is failing, I said, shifting gears, because I couldn't process the adoption revelation yet. That's why the timing. That's the urgency. I pulled up public records on my laptop, searching for Robert Miller's business ventures. It didn't take long to find. Miller's Table, he'd used my name for his restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on me. Had been hemorrhaging money since 2020. Court judgments for unpaid rent, vendor lawsuits, and the big one, $340,000 owed to his landlord, with a final collection deadline of January 15, 2024. 3 weeks after Christmas dinner, if he didn't pay, they'd seize everything, including his home, which he'd used as collateral for a business loan back in 2022. The timeline crystallized with brutal clarity. Fraud started in July, 6 months before the deadline. Christmas demand was the endgame. If I gave them 50% of my company, $7.5 million, they'd solve their debt and secure their future. If I refused, they'd threaten to implicate me in the fraud they'd created. They weren't asking for help. They were executing a plan to rob me with my own identity as the weapon. Martin, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. File criminal complaints with the FBI and Illinois State Police. Freeze every fraudulent account. File credit fraud reports with all 3 bureaus. Send cease and desist letters to every entity that's using my information. Prepare for civil litigation. Martin leaned forward. Danielle, once you file, you can unfile. The FBI will investigate, and if the evidence supports it, which it clearly does, they'll prosecute. Your father is looking at 3 to 5 years in federal prison minimum. Your mother will be charged as an accessory if they can prove she knew. Madison might face conspiracy charges, depending on her involvement. This will be public. Media will cover it. Your business will be scrutinized. Are you absolutely certain? I didn't hesitate. File everything. Today. This wasn't emotion. This was risk mitigation. If I did nothing, the fraud would continue and escalate. If I confronted them privately, they'd deny everything or manipulate me further. Legal action was the only path that protected me. What about James Holloway? Martin asked quietly, referencing my biological father's name from the records. I paused, then shook my head. Not yet, one crisis at a time. Within 6 weeks, federal agents would be knocking on my parents' door, and the family who'd spent 35 years making me invisible was about to become front-page news. 6 weeks after I filed the complaints, federal agents knocked on my parents' door at 7:15 in the morning. I wasn't there, of course. I learned about it from Martin, who called me from his car. FBI executed the search warrants an hour ago. They're seizing computers, phones, financial documents, anything with your forged signature. I sat at my desk, coffee growing cold in my hand, trying to process what I'd set in motion. This was real now, irreversible. Your father is being questioned but not arrested yet, Martin continued. He's reportedly being combative, insisting this is a family matter, not criminal. Your mother had a panic attack during the search. Paramedics took her to the hospital for evaluation. I closed my eyes. I'd known this would be ugly. Knowing didn't make it easier. By February 12th, the local news had picked up the story. Parents accused of stealing identity of daughter to fund failing restaurant. The headline made it sound almost mundane, but the article was detailed and damning. Within days, it went regional. Social media exploded with outraged think pieces about financial abuse and toxic family dynamics. My company was named Public Records, made that unavoidable, but we were framed as victims, which at least protected my business reputation. My parents attempted damage control. Robert's attorney released a statement painting me as a vindictive daughter with a grudge against her loving family. My mother gave a tearful interview to a local station claiming she didn't recognize the person I'd become. Madison posted something vague on social media about being caught in the middle of a family tragedy, asking for privacy. It all backfired spectacularly when journalists started digging. They found the $800,000 in business debt, Madison's Instagram history of luxury purchases, a pattern of financial irresponsibility stretching back years. The narrative my family tried to construct crumbled under the weight of public record. 3 weeks into the investigation, Martin called with an unexpected request. Madison wants to meet with you. She's facing potential conspiracy charges related to the condo scheme, and she wants to talk. Absolutely not. Hear me out, Martin said carefully. If she's willing to testify against your parents, it significantly strengthens the prosecution's case. It also reduces her liability. I think you should listen to what she has to say. I'll be there as witness. Everything documented. You don't have to forgive her, just hear her out. I agreed reluctantly to meet in Martin's office. Neutral ground. Everything on record. Madison arrived looking like someone I barely recognize. No designer clothes, just jeans and a plain sweater. She'd lost weight and not in a healthy way. Stress had carved hollows under her eyes. She sat down across from me and didn't waste time with pleasantries. I wasn't a victim in this. I knew what they were planning. I stayed silent, waiting. Dad told me about the Christmas dinner planned 2 weeks in advance. He said you wouldn't mind giving me part of your company because you didn't really care about family anyway. And Her voice cracked. I agreed with him. I thought you owed me something. The fraud, I prompted when she hesitated. I knew about some of it. I was there when Dad used your company name as a reference on loan applications. I didn't stop him. The condo thing was actually my idea. I researched tax loopholes online and suggested adding you as co-owner. I thought it was clever, not illegal. She looked up at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw something honest in her face. I've been jealous of you for as long as I can remember. You were smarter, stronger, more capable. Mom and Dad made me the favorite because I was mediocre and non-threatening. You were the real threat, and I hated you for it. When they wanted to take from you, I didn't just let it happen. I wanted it to happen. The confession hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. Mostly, I just felt tired. I'm testifying against them, Madison continued. Not just to save myself, though, that's part of it, but because it's the truth, and you deserve the truth. I looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for being honest. Martin will coordinate with the prosecutors about your testimony. She nodded, standing to leave. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know, I said, but I didn't tell her I forgave her, because I didn't. 6 months into the investigation in August, my mother asked for a meeting. Martin arranged it at a public park during daylight hours with him present as witness. She looked older than I remembered, frailer somehow. I need to tell you about James Holloway, she said without preamble, about why I couldn't love you the way I should have. She told me about the violence, the control, the threats, how she'd run when she was pregnant with me, how Robert had agreed to marry her with conditions never contact James, never mention him, and let Robert adopt me so James couldn't claim custody. Robert resented you every single day, she said, her voice breaking. You reminded him he was second choice. And I made a terrible decision. I sacrificed your emotional safety to keep my marriage stable. The more Robert treated you poorly, the more I overcompensated with Madison to keep the peace. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it. But I was a child, I said quietly. I shouldn't have had to be that strong. I know. Tears streamed down her face. What can I do? How can I make any part of this right before I go to prison? I considered her question for a long time. You can testify truthfully. Tell the prosecutors everything Robert did. Stop protecting him the way you never protected me. I will, she whispered. I promise. I stood to leave. She called after me. I did love you. I just loved my safety more. That's not an excuse. That's just the truth. I turned back to look at her. I know, but love without protection isn't love. It's cowardice. As I walked away, she called out one more time. What happens to us now? I didn't turn around. You face the consequences, like everyone else. The hardest part wasn't the trial. It was living with the choice to let them fall. 18 months later, in March 2026, I sat in a federal courthouse watching 3 people who'd once been my family accept their fate. Robert Miller pleaded guilty to wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison, $150,000 in restitution, and 3 years of supervised release after his sentence. At 67, he'd be 72 when he walked out. He'd also forfeited his interest in the house and was permanently banned from serving as a corporate officer. Mr. Miller, the judge said, her voice measured but firm, you betrayed someone who should have been able to rely on you for protection. Instead, you exploited your daughter's identity and reputation for personal gain. This court cannot and will not countenance such calculated betrayal. When asked if he had anything to say to me, Robert looked across the courtroom. Our eyes met. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he might actually apologize, might show some shred of remorse. Instead, he turned back to the judge and said, "No, Your Honor." Even at sentencing, facing prison, he couldn't bring himself to say he was sorry. My mother's sentencing was lighter. She'd cooperated fully with prosecutors, testified against Robert, and had no prior criminal history. 3 years probation, $50,000 in restitution, 500 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and an ankle monitor for 18 months. No prison time. When given the chance to speak, she turned to face me. Danielle, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. I kept my expression neutral. I'd heard her apology before in that park 6 months ago. Hearing it again in court didn't make it more meaningful. Madison had accepted an immunity deal in exchange for her testimony. No criminal record, but a civil penalty of $75,000 to be paid to me over 10 years, $625 a month for the next decade. A constant reminder of what she'd been willing to do. Before the sentencing, I'd been required to read my victim impact statement. I'd spent weeks writing it, revising it, trying to capture not just what they'd done, but why it had been possible for them to do it. From childhood. I'd read my voice steady, despite the weight of 20 years of pain behind each word. I learned I wasn't a priority. Small moments, missed school events, overlooked achievements. Praise always redirected to my sister, each instance minor enough to dismiss, but collectively they taught me I didn't matter. I'd watched Robert stare at the table, watched Patricia cry silently, watched Madison cover her face with her hands. When I discovered the identity theft, my first thought wasn't anger. It was, of course. Of course they saw my success as theirs to claim. I'd been invisible to them my whole life. Why would my accomplishments be any different? I'd describe the Christmas dinner. The public humiliation, my mother's hand across my face, while 20 people watched and no one intervened. The fraud was the final proof, I'd concluded. I was never family. I was an asset. 3 years passed before I truly understood that the sentencing wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of building something new. By 2029, at 38, I'd grown Miller Advisory Solutions by 20%. We now had 45 employees. But more importantly, I'd launched the Invisible Daughter Foundation, dedicated to empowering young women from dysfunctional families to build independent lives. We provided business scholarships, mentorship programs, legal aid for those escaping financial abuse, and therapy stipends. We'd helped 30 women so far, and every single one of their stories echoed pieces of my own. When I was invited to speak at the Women in Leadership Summit in Chicago, the invitation felt like coming full circle. My topic, building success on your own terms when family can't be your foundation. Backstage reviewing the attendee list, I saw Madison's name. She was working at the venue as an event coordinator. I spotted her across the room as I prepared to go on stage. She looked up, saw me, and gave a small, respectful nod. I nodded back. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The dynamic was clear. She was living with her consequences, slowly rebuilding a life based on her own efforts. I'd moved on. There would be no reconciliation, but there was mutual acknowledgement. That was enough. After my keynote speech, I found a letter waiting in my office forwarded by my attorney. James Holloway, my biological father, had died 2 months earlier at 64 from heart disease. He'd left me everything: a trust fund worth $580,000, a modest home in Oregon, and a letter with instructions to deliver it only after his death. I sat with that letter for 3 days before I could read it. When I finally did, I found not excuses but honest acknowledgement. He admitted to the violence that had driven my mother away. He described years of therapy, sobriety, and community work. He explained why he'd never contacted me directly. He hadn't wanted to disrupt my life or cause my mother more fear. I don't expect forgiveness, he'd written, but I want you to know I'm proud of you. After discussing it in therapy, I decided to accept $300,000 for the foundation and donate $200,000 to domestic violence organizations. I sold the house and donated those proceeds to men's rehabilitation programs. He couldn't buy forgiveness, but he had changed. That mattered not enough to absolve him, but enough to acknowledge. Now, on a late evening in my corner office, I review scholarship applications from young women writing about escaping toxic families. I see myself at every essay. My phone rings. Emma, a friend I met in a therapy group years ago. Dinner tonight. My first instinct is to decline. Work to finish. Applications to review. The old workaholic patterns die hard, but I catch myself. Yes, I'll be there. I close my laptop and walk out into the Chicago night. Robert is still in prison. Madison's monthly payments arrive like clockwork. Patricia sent a letter last month that I never opened. Some relationships can't be salvaged, and that's okay. They raised me to be invisible. They never imagined I would become untouchable. I spent 35 years learning to be invisible. I'll spend the rest of my life teaching others how to be seen. Danielle's story teaches us something profound. Protecting yourself is not cruelty, and setting boundaries is not betrayal. For 35 years, she tried to earn love by being small, quiet, and undemanding. But real love doesn't require you to disappear. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to sacrifice yourself for people who see you as a resource, not a person. Family should be your foundation, not your burden. And when they become the latter, walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. Danielle didn't win because she destroyed her family. She won because she finally understood her worth, didn't depend on their approval. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories about strength, justice, and reclaiming your power. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose yourself over family expectations? How did you find the courage? Your story might help someone else take that first step. Thank you for listening.